First of all, hello everyone. Namaskar. It's a really big pleasure for me to be at an A+ institution in India. Victoria and I have done lots of these workshops, but I think for both of us, it's the first time in India. So we're very excited to be here with you. And please do feel free to ask us questions. That's why we're here as well. So I'm going to talk about publication ethics and research integrity. And I'll explain to you a little bit why I feel this is a very, very important topic. So I used to be a researcher. I was a neuroscience, neuroimmunologist, and my research very much depended on the validity of previous research, because I'm making my hypothesis, I'm building my research, and that's based on what other researchers have done, right? And so when I was doing my PhD, we had formed our hypothesis on a very important paper. And my supervisor and me planned our experiments. We wanted to do this kind of work in humans. That research paper had done it in rats. So I spent the whole first of my first year of my PhD doing the molecular biology and the biochemistry part. But when we came to do the functional part of the work, nothing was working. We couldn't replicate that study. We had no signal, negative results, couldn't understand why. So my supervisor said to me that, okay, why don't you write to that research team? That research team was based in a different institution, in a different country. We didn't know them. But he said, write to them, explain what you're doing, explain why it's not working, and ask them for advice. So I wrote them a very long email. I said, hello, I'm a PhD student. I'm actually building my work upon what you found in rats. I'm doing that in humans, but I'm facing these problems. Can you advise me? And I waited 1 week, and after 1 week he replied, one sentence saying, oh, these experiments are very difficult, even for my most experienced researcher. That's all he said. No advice, nothing. So when I spoke to my supervisor, he said, we can't trust that work. We can't trust the paper. So maybe the data was fake. And that harmed my PhD, because I just spent almost 2 years doing this work. So I feel very, very strongly about the integrity of the research, because the research that we are publishing has to be true. If it's not true, then we're all wasting our time. Now, can I ask in this room, who is a researcher? Can you put your hands up? Excellent. There's quite a lot of you. Who is in the life sciences, biotechnology? Yeah. Okay. Pharmaceutical sciences? Yeah. How about the humanities? Yeah, there's a lot of researchers here. How many have published papers? Yeah. How many of you are building your current work based on what is published? Almost everyone, right? So, as a researcher, there's 3 things that are really important. One is that the work you're doing is high quality, is reliable, and you can publish it in a good place that other people will read. Second thing is that the work of other people you're reading is also reliable and can be trusted. And the third is your reputation. And these 3 things can't be compromised. So what keeps Victoria and me busy is dealing with the problem that we have in publishing about lots and lots of research being published that is flawed or actually deliberately faked. So, now that we've talked about that, this is the outline that I'll be following. First of all, I'll talk about research ethics. Then I'll talk about publication ethics and who is responsible for guiding this. Then what are the problems that we see? What are the common problems? And by talking to you about that today, hopefully it will help you to prevent those problems. And then the kind of changes we need to make if we have to correct a published article, and then predatory access journals, which Victoria spoke about a little bit, and finally some COPE guidelines, which is a very, very powerful resource for all researchers. So when it comes to ethics, there are two main arms. So one arm is the research, and the other is publication. So we are responsible for the publication ethics, but you, academic researchers, the institution, the country you live in, you are responsible for the research ethics. So research ethics is guided by different bodies. For human research, Declaration of Helsinki. Most institutions should have an institutional ethics committee, and they will be deciding on what is ethical to do based on local laws. And from this, we form publication ethics guidelines. And there are various bodies that are responsible for that. So first of all, we come to research in humans. Now, how many of you here actually conduct your research in humans? Can you put your... Yeah, quite a few of you. So when it comes to research in humans, the most important thing is that they are kept safe during the research process. So usually I do this talk to medical institutions, but in this particular case, I'll focus on the basic principle of research ethics in humans. One is that they are aware that you are doing the research on them, and they agree that they are going to be a subject of your research, and that any data you collect from them is kept safely. You respect their privacy, and they also know why you're doing the research. So the Declaration of Helsinki, which I've mentioned here, this came about because before there was no real guideline about research in humans. And what happened, scientists would do all kinds of things, all kinds of research. But this got really bad during World War II. Because during World War II, scientists from some countries were doing some very, very horrible, inhumane experiments on prisoners of war. And so they were doing this kind of research with no kind of ethics and really damaging these people because they were prisoners. And after the war ended, the research community basically came together and said, we can never allow this to happen again. We can never allow the health and safety of a human person to be less than the aim of the research. And there was a big meeting in Helsinki, in Finland, where they came up with this guideline. That's why it's called the Declaration of Helsinki. And so what we do on the journal side is we ask anyone who has done research on humans has followed the principles set out by the Declaration of Helsinki. And I've put some links there. If anyone is interested, these are some good resources that give you background on that. So then it comes to animals. Who here works on animals? Not many of you, okay. But when it comes to animals, there are also some basic principles that we have to actually keep in mind. And that is that the animals are treated well, they're kept safely, and that you don't use too many animals in your research than what is actually necessary. And so for that kind of research, we have these guidelines, these guidelines which will outline what kind of practices you can put into place when you're working on animals. And again, on the journal side, journal editors will check that you have actually followed the right kind of guidelines. And then there's plants. So even research in plants will have ethical guidelines. And that's partly because sometimes some plants can be endangered, or maybe you've collected it from the wild, or maybe it's in the laboratory. But there's also ethical guidelines for research on plants. And again, this is something that journal editors will look for. So a journal editor will not only be looking for, is this in scope, is this interesting, they will also be checking, has this been ethically conducted? Because journals don't want to publish articles that are unethical. So there are many different study designs. This is just some of them. Because there are so many different ways of doing research, there are many different ethical considerations. So I've spoken already about humans and animals, but I'll just point your attention to here at the bottom, endangered species and biosafety and biodiversity. So in most cases, if a species, if that's a plant or an animal, you wouldn't generally be allowed to do research on that. But if the ethics committee approves the research and approves the protocol, then sometimes what